In this episode, we are confronting a sobering reality often overlooked in discussions of global development and well-being: the prevalence of psychological trauma in the third world. While the term trauma may conjure images of war-torn landscapes or natural disasters, the reality is that individuals living in developing nations are equally susceptible to profound psychological distress, often exacerbated by systemic inequalities, political instability, and social upheaval. Against the backdrop of poverty, political turmoil, and limited access to mental health resources, the psychological toll of living in the third world can be staggering, from the intergenerational trauma inflicted by colonialism and imperialism to the daily struggles of navigating poverty, violence, and displacement. The experiences of individuals in these regions underscore the universality of human suffering and resilience. Yet, amidst the adversity, there exists a pressing need to amplify voices, destigmatize mental health discourse, and advocate for inclusive and culturally sensitive approaches to healing and support. Hi family and friends, welcome to another episode of Mental Health Conversations with Nerat-Dagwi. This episode is going to be a continuation of where we already started. We are all traumatized. And from the intro, you know that the matters really choke. We have a lot of issues that we need to discuss. Alright, so moving on, what really is the reality of living in a third world country? Like Nigeria, we're not very developed. There's poverty left, right and center, economic hardship, insecurity, and poor access to education. These are the three major things I'm going to be talking about and how they contribute to citizens of a third world country being traumatized. First and foremost, let's begin with poverty and economic hardship. How we can see when people are traumatized in this kind of situation is that there's an increase in stress levels and anxiety and even depression because there is poor access to healthcare. The budgetary allocations. Alright, so we're going to begin with poverty and economic hardship. I have heard different people say that in Africa, we don't have natural disasters, that our natural disasters are leaders, and it's their fault that our economy is the way it is and we are poor the way we are because of their great ineptitude in managing both human and natural resources. It's not like we don't have these resources, we have them in abundance, but our managers are very terrible people, and their mismanagement has resulted in economic hardship. In fact, we see this in people because there's high levels of stress, anxiety, and even depression. We see that inflation is constantly on the rise. Like, I understand that inflation has happened all over the world in the past 2 to 3 years. Like, everybody is feeling the heat. We're all in this together, right? But then it's like there's a different type of inflation in Africa, in Nigeria most especially, because the prices of things are on a constant rise. Inflation is just like age, it never comes down. And especially in Nigeria, people are honestly just trying to feed. People just want to eat and be alive. People just want to survive. And it's not like there are jobs just lying around somewhere. Let's not even begin to talk about the responsibilities of the government, the basic amenities that they are supposed to provide. They're not even there. Citizens are deprived. And in a consumer country like Nigeria, it's terrible because we're not producing anything. We can barely even produce anything. And there's just a lack of amenities, like I said earlier, even the responsibilities, the basic things that the government's supposed to provide. We don't even have them. And so this poor access to mental health care, just general health care, poor access to education, poor access to the basic necessities of life. That is what we're facing. In fact, I think 2 to 3 years ago, I saw this documentary about the budgetary allocations in Nigeria. And there was a year that was picked, and the allocation for healthcare, I believe, was like, I don't think it was up to 20% of the budget. And out of that budget, what was kept apart, what was set apart for mental health care was barely 2%. So you see, truly, our leaders have proven themselves to be our natural disasters. And then there's the issue of insecurity. Not just in Nigeria. Of course, people are suffering from different forms of insecurity all over the world. But we see a higher prevalence of this in third world countries, in African countries. And people are being displaced in their own hometowns. People are being displaced in their own countries. For example, where I'm from, just Nigeria, in Plateau State, in fact, in the entire Middle Belt, there have been series of attacks from Fulani herders. So farmers can't even farm to say that we're going to, produce any agricultural goods. Then there's the issue of Boko Haram that, look, this issue, I don't think that the impact of it will be clearly gone within the next decade. Because I remember traveling to Maiduguri once, and there were resettlement arrangements that were made by the government of that state to resettle people that were displaced. And I'm not going to lie, I felt a whole wave of emotions. I don't know whether to call it grief or sadness. I was extremely sad because these people have just been moved, like uprooted from everything that they know and everything that they hold dear. And it is really mind-boggling to think that in your own state, in your own local government, you have been displaced and you're staying in an IDP camp. It's honestly terrible. I went to an outreach in Makurdi, Benue State, and we were going to take some supplies to an IDP camp there. And it was really sad because it's not like the living conditions there were good. They had makeshift shelters to stay in. The living conditions were deplorable. And then there's now the issue of some host communities taking advantage of people that are in the IDP camps. It's really terrible. Like in Mango and Bokos of Plateau State, the host communities were taking advantage of the people. And there was nothing they could do about it. Now, for people that have suffered as a result of insecurity, like I said earlier, there's a heightened level of stress and anxiety and depression, and this can easily metamorphose into anxiety disorders and even PTSD. I'll quickly share my experience like I started sharing in the previous episode when I was talking about collective trauma. And I mentioned about the Lekki Tollgate massacre. Now, for me, my experience throughout the NSAS protest period in Nigeria, I was safe. No harm came to me or any of my family members. I didn't lose anyone in the protest. But on the other hand, I didn't participate in any of the protests because my parents didn't think it was safe. Even my boss at work, he didn't think it was wise for me to go out to protest. And throughout the whole period of the NSAS protest, I kept feeling guilty. And even on the first anniversary, I just had an overwhelming feeling of fear and sadness that I didn't join the protests. I was really feeling terrible. Like I couldn't even scroll through social media because of guilt and shame, because I felt like I could have participated, I wasn't there, but just reading people's stories really traumatized me to the point that I was at a camp and some people were going to use a soundbite from that night at the Lekki Tollgate. And when the sound came up, I was so scared that I started crying. In the hall, I didn't know what was happening, and it was like I was there. But thankfully, my friend was there, and she held me and hugged me and kept telling me, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. And for the past few anniversaries of the NSAS protests, I honestly do not know how to feel. Like sometimes I wish people won't even commemorate the anniversary. I understand that it can be a period for us to heal together, but it has really been tough. And I'm sure that all of us have stories to tell regarding our experiences during the NSAS protests. But now moving on to bigger fish in quotes, there have been multiple coups across Africa, and according to the World Bank estimates, countries that are poorer and whose democracies are less stable have historically been more prone to takeovers. 15 of the 20 countries topping the 2022 Fragile Index created by the Fund for Peace are in Africa. So out of 20 countries, 15 are in Africa. And out of those 15, 12 have had at least one successful coup in their history. And these countries include Somalia, DR Congo, Central African Republic, Chad, Sudan, Zimbabwe. And conversely, there have been no successful coups in richer African countries with stronger institutions such as South Africa and Botswana. And we see how coups have become increasingly limited to the poorest countries in the world. And the recent wave of coups that we have been seeing in Africa fits directly into that. I mean, countries that are not even producing, like their GDP is less than $22 billion. They are suffering all of these things. There is a wave of hunger across the continent. People are suffering. Now, one of the things that really tugs at my heart when considering the things that traumatize citizens is poor education. There is a lack of access across board, and this lack of access to proper education has made people stay in poverty, a vicious cycle. I mean, imagine a family where parents were not exactly exposed to proper education, and so they don't have access to better opportunities. And they raise their children in an environment where they also don't have proper access to education, and so it limits their options. I mean, of course, there are few instances where children, leave home in search of greener pastures and become successful, but they have to work twice as hard to compensate for the lack of access, even the poor education that they've had. They have a lot more burden to bear on their shoulders. And let me just tell you, Nigeria, first of all, our education system needs to be completely overhauled because it is deplorable. And education is expensive. What? Education is expensive. So you see a situation where a child is not only going to school because you have to help out at home with family income. You can't just be giving birth to and go to school peacefully without contributing to family income. I mean, most of us can relate to this. That is how our education is. We don't just go to school to have fun. Going to school is a lot of work. And it's not like some of us even understand what going to school is supposed to do for us. I mean, that's the only true gift that our parents could really hand over to us. And we have to grab onto it with two hands, like our lives depend on it. And we see situations where private schools are expensive for the typical Nigerian citizen to afford, and public schools are too deplorable in state for you to trust that your children will have a good education. I mean, they are overcrowded and there's barely enough teachers, and even the teachers that are there, you can't really vouch for them that this is what the children are like. Everything is just done haphazardly. And after suffering all of this as an individual, when we now find ourselves in a better place, or when things begin to become better, when you're finally having opportunities for better access to healthcare, better access to basic amenities, that trauma that we have been traumatized is still there. And we can see it being manifested in the following ways. For example, now somebody that was neck deep in poverty will almost always avoid talking about money or finances. By all means, as long as it depends on them, they avoid talking about money. And we also see it being manifested in low self-esteem due to socioeconomic status. A lot of people don't feel like they are good enough because of their socioeconomic status. I come from a poor background. But granted, Nigerians are a very confident bunch, but come on, we see situations where people cower because of their socioeconomic status. There's also social withdrawal, like you don't want to go out, you don't want to chill, in quotes, because of shame and embarrassment of the state of your finances. I mean, you could be in a better place, right? But it would just be so difficult for you to socialize, to go out and do what normal people do. And then there's a hypervigilance because you are trying to monitor what your finances are. Even if you actually have enough, even if you're doing just fine. But you just be hypervigilant because your mind is flashing back to when you had absolutely nothing. Like there was scarcity, you were deprived, and then even if you don't know it, but you have difficulty trusting with your finances as well, and even adjusting to a new environment. Like it can be overwhelming that you are moving from a very deplorable state to something and somewhere that is better. Like it can be overwhelming, and so you find it difficult to trust or even adjust to your new environment, because there's the feelings of guilt and shame. Like, how can this good thing happen to me? Let's say you've moved away from a war-torn zone and you're doing better, and the feelings of guilt and shame will just overcrowd you, and you begin to feel like, am I even better than these people? I mean, we're all suffering before, but what's so special about me? And you begin to feel guilty and ashamed. Also, I think that a good number of Nigerians and Africans can relate to this. Overcompensation. You work and work and work and work. I understand that to make a good living, you have to work for it, right? But I've seen incidences where people moving to, more developed countries are taking on more jobs and are stressing themselves out because, of course, there's such a thing as black tax. And it's really terrible because you are working yourself, the stress is accumulating, but you still feel like, no, I've not done enough to take care of myself. I don't have enough, you see. So it's still going back and showing you how hypervigilance can come into play. But on the other hand, our response could be positive growth, like being in a new environment can foster you to flourish regardless of the kind of past that you've had, regardless of the insecurity that you've been pulled out of, or the lack of access to basic amenities that you've had to go through or suffer. Being in a new environment can actually be a good thing. You see people blossoming and, just flourishing in the new environment and taking every opportunity as it comes. So the responses are not only bad, but there can also be positive growth. Now, when we are talking about solutions, what can be done? What can now be done to lessen the effect of these traumatic experiences across board for all citizens, regardless of socioeconomic status? First of all, I believe that integrating mental health in primary health care can go a long way. I know that I've taken quite a number of trips across my state, and one thing that I know is constant is primary healthcare centers. And these healthcare centers also, they need a lot of work to be done on them, right? But as that work is being done, as improvements are made, I believe strongly that integrating mental health care will go a long way. It can help people that have been displaced, even refugees and even migrants with mental health conditions, and can make care more accessible and cost effective. I mean, the delivery of interventions may require that the people that have been displaced, the victims, will need to, adapt, maybe learn a new language or something. Even cultural considerations will have to be put into place. But integrating it will go a long way. Also, on the other hand, the impacts of these stressors can also be buffered by protective factors. This is mainly from the government, right? By protective factors such as access to employment and services, that's just basic amenities, and social support, and also prioritizing family reunification among refugees, migrants, people that have been displaced, and of course, access to education. It can actually help children resettle better. Like, imagine children in an IDP. Everybody's hopeless, and we don't know the next step. We don't know what's going to happen next. But if there is access to education, at least the children have something to look forward to, and that can contribute to helping them resettle better. All right, at this juncture, I hope that with these few points of mine, I've been able to convince you that in one way or the other, we are all traumatized. But that's not a bad thing. because we're all in this together. We can always lend a helping hand. And because we are traumatized, doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. It doesn't. Like I said in the previous episode, the mental health tip still remains: practice self-compassion. And in the face of poverty and insecurity and even poor education, it's easy to be hard on ourselves and to feel overwhelmed by the circumstances because they're definitely beyond our control. But I want you to be gentle with yourself and acknowledge your struggles. Sit down with them and treat yourself with kindness. And you know that seeking support from a loved one or even a mental health professional is a sign of strength and not weakness. And you, my dear listener, deserve care and support, even in difficult times. Thank you for listening to this episode. Let's keep the conversation going on social media. You can connect with me at Nerat-Dagwi on all social media, and feel free to follow the podcast page at mentalhealth.conversations on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, bye.